Hi folks, I'm Matthew Kimberley and I'm really excited to introduce Ron Friedman. Ron Friedman is an award-winning social psychologist who specializes in human motivation. He served on the faculty of the University of Rochester, Nazareth College and Hobart and William Smith colleges, and he's consulted for some of the world's biggest and most successful companies. His research has appeared in NPR and in big newspapers like New York Times, the Financial Times, the Globe, the Mail, Washington Post, the Guardian, as well as magazines like Men's Health, Entrepreneur, Success. He's a very good guy. He's the author of the brilliant book, which I highly recommend, The Best Place to Work, The Art and Science of Creating an Extraordinary Workplace, and he contributes to the Harvard Business Review, Psychology Today, Fast Company, Forbes, CNN, and a lot more. Enjoy the interview. Ron Friedman, thank you so much for joining me. You are a PhD, is that right?
It is.
Yeah, I knew that. It wasn't a trick question. So I'm surrounding myself by as many smart people as I possibly can, collecting PhDs by osmosis. I like to think by sucking out all the brains of all the smart people that I get to hang out with. Is there any truth to the fact, Ron, that we will become more productive or smarter by hanging around with those five people who myth tells us, we're the sum of the five people that we spend our time with? Can I get smarter by osmosis? How important are relationships to the way that I approach getting things done and being more productive?
It's so interesting that you asked that because it's actually one of the first studies I ever did in graduate school. When I got into this program with Ed Deci, the guy who Daniel Pink wrote about in the book Drive. So my first study was about how when I go to the gym, I suddenly feel more motivated to exercise. But before I go to the gym, it's like it's a hassle to get there, right? But when you get there, you're surrounded by people who are really motivated. All of a sudden, you become motivated. And so that study led to the discovery of motivational contagion. And so when you surround yourself by people who are really, really energized by the work that they do, that ends up elevating your performance. And so one of the smartest things you can do actually at work, if you're sitting with a group of people, is to find the people who are most productive and seat yourself next to them because their motivation and their energy will spill over to you.
Right. And is the reverse true? So if I hang out with people who are day drinking, am I more likely to be a day drinker?
It's interesting because it changes your perception of what norms are. Right. And so if you see people who are doing certain things, it becomes much harder for you to break that habit. But one thing you can do if you're surrounded by people who are slackers, frankly, is to think strategically about your downtime. And so surrounding yourself with content on your ride home, on your commute home, when you're at the gym, listening to people who are very successful on podcasts, perhaps like this one, right? And that changes your perception, again, in a deliberate way. And so a lot of times we take for granted the information that just kind of surrounds us. And to the extent that you're able to shape that, that can also go beyond the moment-to-moment experience, but also change your goals and your performance in just about everything that you do.
Say I live in a depressed town like any former industrial town in the States where the glory days have gone, or many similar places in the UK where I'm from, and the average income of the 90%, average income of the population is maybe under $30,000 or under $40,000 a year. I know people from communities like this. I grew up in a community like that, and I physically moved myself away from those places, which I think in part has allowed me to venture into a new normal, to borrow your words from you. Is it good enough to listen to inspirational, motivational speakers, smart people telling the stories of their success in our ears, or watching videos about that, or reading personal development books? Is it as good as having, for example, living in a community where the average income is 100,000? Do we rise to? Is it going to be easier to rise to the occasion, or do we not know?
I don't think it needs to be an either or. I think you can do both. And the reason I say that is not, obviously to suggest that's not necessarily a breakthrough, right? Like that you don't have to choose one or the other. But what it can do when you surround yourself with that content is it can give you direction on how to go about meeting the people who you need to meet in order to be successful. So we live in a world now where you can email Malcolm Gladwell probably within 5 minutes, right? Like you have access to anyone who you need access to. And so being around successful people doesn't necessarily require being with them in the same room. Like you and I I don't even know what country you're in today.
Right.
So the fact that we can have these conversations, it really is incredible. About 5 years ago, I ventured off into this world where I used to be a consultant. So I started off as a psychologist teaching at colleges and universities, then decided, being a tenured track professor, it's not for me. Because as a professor, you're essentially teaching people the same thing over and over again. So I decided, I'm going to go be a consultant. So I got to the workplace, and being in that experience of being a consultant, I came to realize, wow, there is such a disparity between the things that we've been taught as psychologists are the factors that lead to creativity and success and productivity, and how most organizations are running themselves. So I decided, I'm going to quit my job, write a book on what the best workplaces do differently. What does the science tell us about how we can all be successful? So in writing that book, that experience, what could have been isolating, right? Because I was an author, and as an author, you don't really have access to a lot of folks who you can dialogue with over the course of the day, run ideas by. But then I became very deliberate about who I was going to surround myself by. And in that process of finding the right people to be around, completely changed my perspective of what's possible. And, we have that ability, and it doesn't require physical proximity. We can do it online.
Yeah. How is it better to be along the same along the same thought process? Is the number of relationships that we have important? Is the nature of the relationships that we have important? Is it better to know, let's say we're just going on net worth figures, is it going to be better for me to know 100 millionaires kinda, or 5 millionaires very well? How important are close relationships?
What's really important is the extent to which the person's success is relatable to you. So I'll give you a very striking example from my own life. I was a professor, and was friends with another professor who decided to go off, also quit her job. She also wanted to write a book, decided not to, ended up starting an online program. And within a few years, 2 years really, was making millions of dollars a year, had a staff of 25 people. And the fact that she shared so many things in common with me was she's one person. I didn't need 1,000 people. I had one person who had shown me that I have the skills to do it myself, because she was so comparable to me in so many ways. So really, it isn't about the numbers. It's about the extent to which the person has similarity to your place in life. And, we talk about relationships, but one of the things that we really need to consider when it comes down to relationships is really that is a basic human psychological need. So if we think about what is it that makes people successful at work, it really is 3 basic human psychological needs. And there's decades of research on this. Doesn't matter what your age is, doesn't matter doesn't matter your gender. It is these 3 needs. The first is the need for close relationships where you're appreciated, respected, and valued. The second is the need for competence, so feeling like you're growing your competence on a regular basis. Not enough to feel like you're good at your job, you need to feel like you're growing.
Okay.
And the third, having some sense of autonomy, feeling like the work you're doing is your choice. And when you have those 3 basic psychological needs, regardless of whether you're an entrepreneur, a salesperson, or an employee, those are the basic psychological building blocks that can make you successful in anything that you do.
So let's repeat those for everyone who's listening. Close relationships, competence was the third one, and the second one was autonomy. Okay.
Autonomy. Those are the 3 basic psychological needs. And when people have that, they tend to be healthier, happier, more productive. Doesn't even matter if it's work. We're even talking about marriages. When people feel like they have competence, close relationships, and autonomy, they're more successful in their marriage. And people tend to live longer when they have this.
That's a big eye-opener for me, not in terms of the marriage, but, maybe it is, but in terms of in terms of why so many entrepreneurs, self-employed people, tiny micro business owners are so miserable all the time, or are so manic all the time. They go from being on top of the world to being in the pits of despair, often from 1 hour to the next. And I wonder whether there's a correlation, and I'm just speculating here. I wonder, you're the research scientist. I wonder if there's any correlation between the fact that we sit on our own, in our own offices, maybe in a home office, in front of our computer. We look at the computer, we say, okay, computer, how are we going to make some money today? Or, hello world, what are we going to do? And I wonder whether it's those close relationships which are really the wanting part of the equation, the missing part of the equation for many people. We understand that mastermind groups are very important to be able to hobnob, hang around with people who are in the same boat as us. Would you encourage taking a lunch break? Like, there's so much. Maybe it's a dumb question, but in terms of motivation, should we be walking around the block? Should we be going out front? Should we be meeting people in the middle of our workday, or should we be grabbing a sandwich and hustling on through because working hours are working hours?
You're asking such an important question, because when it comes to relationships, we really feel in a lot of cases like that's something that doesn't require work. It's kind of something that happens in the background naturally. And when we begin to view it as an aspect of what makes us successful at work, we start to treat it differently. And so as someone I mentioned the experience of writing a book, which took a year of essentially isolation, I was very careful about this because I knew about the research. And so I would schedule lunch meetings with people who I wanted to have close relationships with, even though that took me away from work, because although it felt in the moment like I was slacking off, later in the afternoon, it would make a dramatic impact on my performance. And I would notice it because my mood would increase. And especially as a writer or an entrepreneur, you know that isolation can be very damaging. It's almost inhumane in the sense, if you think about how our bodies evolved. We evolved to be in social groups. And so now what do? We go into offices, we close the door, and we sit in front of a screen for 8 hours a day, and we expect to be happy and successful. How's that going to work? And so how do we make that practical? Because in a lot of cases, as you pointed out, people are in these towns and they don't have access to the people who they want to be intentional about spending time with, is doing exactly what we are doing right now. And I do this to this day, where I have friends all over the globe. At lunch hour, I will have we will schedule a lunch together. You get your Chipotle, I'll get my Chipotle, and we'll sit in front of a computer. And it really does have a great impact on your performance. It's remarkable from that perspective. And the other thing that people don't realize is that we need to do this within teams, not just our friends outside of our organizations, but when we're doing it within teams, it increases everybody's performance. And it does it in a number of ways. One is when you and I, let's say we're working on a team together, if you are making a mistake, I am more likely to point that out to you if I know and trust you than if we don't have that close relationship. Right. Vice versa, I'm more likely to ask for help, because now I don't feel like it reflects poorly on my competence. And beyond that, when you think about working within an organization, working within a team, if you don't have trust and appreciation between people or close relationships, then what ends up happening is that people just keep to themselves. They simply do not have those conversations. And it also eats up mental bandwidth to worry about whether or not you're being respected or whether or not you fit in. So to the extent that you feel valued, that enables you to pour more of yourself into actually doing your job.
Can you get too close? I mean, I'm thinking about husband and wife teams who work together. I'm thinking about office romances. Have you done research? Is there research exist? Do we know the answer to, are these damaging to workplace productivity and workplace performance, or are they actually a benefit?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There are going to be cases like those when you talk about romantic relationships. I can't imagine those ever being a good idea when it comes to a business relationship and having success in the workplace. And
purely
frankly,
from a common sense point of view, like it becomes difficult to have rational conversations when you're angry with someone because they're, whatever that might be.
Yes, and frankly, these experiences are so they're so difficult to capture in the labs that we don't really have research on them. But that said, what I can say, and this is counterintuitive, is how friendships form is not the way we think. First of all, if you want people to connect with one another, the number one main motivator and most the biggest trigger for a relationship is when people know what they have in common. So, for example, if I like to bake chocolate chip cookies on the weekend, and I just met you, and you like to bake chocolate chip cookies on the weekend, there's a really good chance that we're going to click. So knowing what we have in common is the fuel for those relationships. But what takes a kind of a surface relationship to the next level, and this is where the research is fascinating, and it is self-disclosure about something that is potentially a weakness. So when I share with you that I have trouble sleeping at night, all of a sudden you feel like you've been brought in to know something about me that other people don't know. And that feeling is what, when it's reciprocated, that's where you have a really close friendship. So if I say I have trouble sleeping and you say, you know what, I'm having the same, or I struggled with that, but here's how I overcame it. Now we have a bond that goes beyond simply knowing what we have in common, because now we have disclosed something about ourselves that is personal. And so sharing information about yourself that is personal can actually be a very effective tool for strategically building relationships.
That sounds like it's ripe for being abused by the sales industry. Indeed, it is. I mean, certainly, can I tell you a secret is one of the greatest rapport building lines in the sales warm up arsenal. Can I tell you a secret, or finding common ground.
The other thing I would say, though, let me just share one other tip that is ripe for abuse is another.
Keep them coming. Keep them coming, Ron.
Yeah, another method of building close relationships is actually exercising together or taking a walk together. So if you can take a walking meeting with a client, that's actually a very effective tool. And here's why. When we exercise, we increase our heart rate. And our brain tends to assume that when our heart rate increases in the presence of another person, it's because we like them. So if you want people to like you, take them on a walking meeting, and then they will assume that it's because they like you, that their heart rate is elevated. And it's unconscious, not a conscious process. And so this is why going on a first date and taking someone to a horror film is a good thing to do.
That's fantastic. I train, I used to own a recruitment company, and occasionally sales team I train will be recruiters. You mentioned that sharing a weakness is a good way to build a rapport with somebody. And the famous interview question that is often asked is, what are your weaknesses? And the standard answer now, I think, has gone down in the annals of cliched interview answers is, well, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, because it's a weakness that isn't a weakness, right? So what would be, this is pure curiosity, but if you are in a job interview and somebody asks you that question, what would be the correct answer?
That's a great question. I guess it would depend on the position. And also, sure. I mean, this is
mild alcoholism and I have a terrible temper would be a bad answer.
That was going to be my second answer.
Right, yeah.
But it's interesting because there is research on when you want to disclose a weakness. And research shows that you don't want to save that for the end of the interview. You actually want to be forthcoming with that early, because then it allows you to correct. And so people who tend to disclose a weakness earlier in an interview tend to make a better impression.
That's very interesting. So take control of the interview process if you at all can.
It's almost like a politician in the sense that you want to own up to it and then very quickly change the conversation. And so if you have to disclose a weakness only when asked, then it feels like you're hiding something. But if you share it without being asked, then that's a different case, for a different experience for the question.
Okay, fantastic. You talked a bit about Ron. Thank you. This is my brain's buzzing now. I feel like we're moving together, and I like you more and more each moment. You mentioned movement. You mentioned walking. You mentioned going to the gym. I'm interested in how the one-person business owner, the solo business owner, or the self-employed person can become more efficient, because none of us want to work long weekends. None of us want to work late into the night. We want to increase our effective hourly rate by getting more productive, and for me, productive is revenue generating work done in the time that we allocate to our office hours. Is going to the gym, and I know Richard Branson was asked, what is the secret to your productivity, or what is the secret to being able to do so much stuff, and he said it's keeping my body in shape, and that's kind of understood. But let me, personal story, I started lifting weights, as you can probably tell, about 3 months ago, and never been part of my day before, and I was in danger of causing myself some serious damage, so I made sure I got a personal trainer who was in quite high demand, and I had to fit into his schedule. So I started going to the gym maybe 4 or 5 times a week to train with this guy, and I had an eating regime which was vastly different to a previous eating regime, which involved refueling basically every 3 hours, and meal prep and things like that. And although I felt better and more energetic, and my revenue didn't suffer, I did feel that I was permanently playing catch up, because I was spending a lot of time out of that I would normally spend at my desk doing work, doing revenue generating activities, looking after my body. And I don't regret it, and I make it a part of my life now. But is there an optimum amount of time? If it's a given, which I think we can agree it is, that if you're in better health, you'll have more energy, you'll be more productive, you'll get the happy chemicals pumping and the rest. Is there an optimum amount? I mean, should we be getting up or a time of day? Should we be getting up at 6 a.m. to hit the gym? Or if you're like me, you've got a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old and there are school runs to do, and should we go first thing in the morning, or should we go last thing, or should we go in the middle of the day? Or can we just skip the gym altogether as long as we feel all right?
Yeah, you and I could probably spend an hour talking about this, and it would be a great conversation, but let me make it quick. So first of all, let me talk about why exercise makes us better at our jobs. One is because when you exercise regularly, you get more blood flowing to the brain. And when you get more blood flowing to the brain, that enables you to focus more attentively. The other aspect of this, and this is something that most people don't know, is that movement triggers memory. And it's because evolutionarily, it was useful for your body to remember things as it moved around, because it would remember where food sources were. And today, we spend all of our day sitting, and we wonder why we can't remember as much as we used to when we were kids. And so movement actually triggers memory. And so there's research on this. If you give people a test, you have them study, you have some people sit in front of their computer, other people go on a treadmill for 20 minutes, they will perform better because of that movement. Because they remember more on the test. And as you pointed out, it puts us in a better mood. Mood is not something that is a nice to have anymore, because if you think about any activity at work, it involves relationships. And so if you're selling, if you are networking, if you're collaborating, mood is essential to all three. And so you can't do your job unless you're in a good mood. Good mood isn't something you do selfishly for yourself. It's the same for exercise. Exercise is not something that you do selfishly for yourself, for the way you look, or for your weight, but because it actually makes you better at your job. And one of the most popular articles I've ever written was for the Harvard Business Review, talking about why you should view exercise as part of your job. And it's for this very reason. You will be better at work. And there's research showing that people who have a gym at the office on days when they work versus on days when they do, on days when people go to the gym, these are the same people. On days when they visit the gym, they get more done in less time, they get along better with their colleagues as reported by their colleagues, and they go home feeling more satisfied. And if you think about your mental energy and getting yourself motivated, to the extent that you're exercising, you have to do less of that heavy lifting, worrying about, like, am I motivated enough? Because you have that energy and you're just applying it to work. So you asked about a great question about optimal time. And so there's research showing that the optimal time tends to be, for most people, in the afternoon after work. And I'll tell you why that is. Okay. One is because you tend to be pretty revved up by the end of the day. And emotional buildup requires physical release. So let me say that again. Emotional buildup requires physical release. If you're pissed off, one of the best things you can do is take that energy into the gym, because you'll feel much better afterwards, and you'll feel more accomplished for having gone to the gym. The other thing that it does is when we go to the gym, we increase our body temperature, right? The movement makes us sweat. That's why we sweat, is because our bodies are warmer. And it usually takes about 5 or 6 hours for that to cool down. And what happens when the body cools down is you get tired. And so if you go to the gym at 5 o'clock, that's actually the ideal time for getting more sleep at night, because now your body is cool exactly when you want it to be when it's time to go to bed.
I'm glad you said that. Last time I went to the gym in the morning, it took me 20 minutes to tie my shoes after the session, and then I had to take a nap. So 5 o'clock is great. Yeah. Fantastic.
But to that point, people who go to the gym in the morning are more likely to stick with their routine. And it's because when it's the first thing you need to do as soon as you get out of bed, there's less of a chance for things to get in the way. So it's a bit of a trade-off. You have to be a little bit more disciplined to get yourself to go after work, but you'll probably get better rewards as a function of it.
Fascinating. And I would apply it immediately and let you know how that goes. For people like me and my clients and my audience who work from home, in the interest of peak performance and productivity, if you got any real, I'm not going to ask you for a top 10, but if you could say, what should we do in terms of the setup of our home office or one person office in order to maximize the perhaps unknown benefits of doing stuff right. And in terms of our working practice, is there anything that we haven't touched on? Working out, having close relationships. What should I do if I want to just stop feeling guilty about potentially slacking off. This is another sentiment that I know a lot of self-employed people feel, which is guilt. Could have done more, could have done more. How can we be relatively confident, based in science, that our environment and our daily practices are giving us the unfair advantage?
Well, let me answer the second one first. So what's like the big insight that we haven't covered yet that I think is important? And that is that not every hour on your calendar is created equally. And here's what I mean by that. If you're an early bird, if you're someone who has more energy earlier in the day, the hour of 9 to 10 is worth twice as much as the hour between 3 and 4. But if you're a night owl, it's the reverse. And so knowing what your chronotype is and then applying that to the way you work is incredibly valuable.
How can you find out if you're not sure? Like, I couldn't tell you for certain. As I get a bit older, I tend to think I'm more of a night owl. Right. That said, it's indisputable that I have more energy first thing in the morning, but I feel I'm able to focus better and for longer periods of time later in the day.
Well, it's funny you should ask, because I'm actually putting together a tool, an assessment that people can use for this very thing. But in general, you don't have to use my tool. What you could do is simply track your energy level over the course of the day on a 1 to 7 scale. Do this every hour and a half, and then look over it at 3 days. After 3 days, and you go find your peak performance hours. And when you have that information, that is transformative, because you block those hours on your calendar, and you do not allow anybody into those hours unless they are a top priority. And if you're doing that consistently, you will find that your productivity doubles. And I say that not because I want to be hyperbolic, but I know it from personal experience, because it is very, very difficult if you are an early bird to go from collaborative meetings to isolated focus work. But it is much easier to do the reverse. You can go from focus work to meetings all day long, but you can't get those hours back once you screw them, right? Like if you waste those hours because somebody guilted you into a meeting, or because you had to do a phone call that you knew was not valuable use of your time, you will waste your day. And to the extent that you are maximizing these peak performance hours consistently, you won't have that guilt, because you'll know that, look, I've used my hours well, and these hours now in the afternoon, I'm really not going to get, even if I was sitting in front of a computer, I would just essentially be banging my head against the wall. I would not be as productive as I otherwise might be. And that frees you up to go do lots of things that you know are second tier work, but are enjoyable things. So, for example, I would never, ever allow myself to be on social media between 9 and 12. But between 4 and 6, I recognize even if I was in front of a computer, I wouldn't get all that much writing done. So it's okay for me to be doing these second-tier tasks. But now let's go back to your first question. So your first question is about the environment and how do you optimize it to ensure that you're performing at a high level.
Like in my office, I've got a few bottles of whiskey, some empty coffee cups, a coffee machine, and frankly, that's about it.
Well, the whiskey
and a big whiteboard. What else? What am I missing?
I think you're probably being facetious about the whiskey. However, the whiskey, there's research showing that alcohol, in fact,
I promise, as you can imagine, I'm not being facetious. They don't get open until the end of the day, I promise.
Okay, well, maybe you should reconsider that if you're doing creative work, because there's research showing that there is an optimal level of alcohol in your body will, in fact, make you more creative. And so when you're in idea generation mode, it's totally fine to have a beer. In fact, this is what I recommend for people to do is, creativity, by the way, is not we're not talking about like, oh, let's do something whimsical. We're talking about problem solving. If you're stuck on a problem, go get that beer, because you will be a lot more creative at solving it. So in terms of the environment, so I did all this research, as I mentioned, for this book, The Best Place to Work, and then I had to go get an office. And so the number one factor on my list that I was looking for when looking for office spaces was large windows. And it's because daylight impacts our level of energy throughout the day. So when we're surrounded by daylight, we are more productive and we're actually more likely to stay on task. And so there's research showing in offices, you can actually predict people's level of engagement and performance by the amount of daylight entering their office. And it's because daylight lowers our stress levels. It gets our body producing more serotonin, which puts us in a better mood. And it gets our body producing more melatonin, which enables us to sleep at night. And so daylight is actually essential for performance. So if, let's say you don't have windows, get out, take some walking meetings, take that cell phone call while you're outside, you're getting exercise and you're getting some daylight. That's going to increase your performance. The other thing I would say is if you're working from home, it's really vital to have a space that you can customize and is only for work. And so, I know for a lot of folks who are working from home, they end up working on their kitchen, or they end up working in their living room, and then they've got to pack up when their kids come home, or their significant other comes home. And actually, that's a poor use of or overlooking something that is actually a very valuable tool, which is remembering things by their physical location. That's something you have when you have a dedicated space. So utilizing that, having things spread out, is actually okay, because it actually helps you remember where things are. So if you can do that, that will save you some time. The other thing you can do is have multiple surfaces on which to work. So I've got a sitting desk and I've got a standing desk from which I'm speaking to you now, and that's valuable because you have it's almost like when I get out from my sitting desk, it's I wipe the slate clean. It's a clean slate. I think clearly about a completely different project. And so to the extent that you're switching back and forth between different projects, having different dedicated spaces for that can be really valuable.
Fantastic. Ron Friedman, what's going on? Where can we find out more about you?
I've got a website. It's called Ignite 80. That's the name of my company. The reason it's called Ignite 80 is because over 80% of the world's employees are not fully engaged at work. So the mission of Ignite 80 is to reverse that trend. But I also have an event that we've been talking a little bit about. It's called the Peak Work Performance Summit, and it's an event I'm really excited about because it features my discussions with over 50 best-selling authors on the science of top performance, and it's available at I guess I'm going to be telling you about it, and you're going to be sharing this with the audience. Is
absolutely that right? Yeah.
Great.
So look below this video, look in the email I sent you, look on the page, and go and check out the Peak Work Performance Summit. I certainly will be. I'm all about incremental improvements. If you can get 1% better here, 1% better there, even if it's by something as simple as walking outside, taking a break, taking 20 minutes, going to the gym, fostering close relationships, not going into business with your husband or wife. Then
if you take nothing else away from this conversation,
that's right. And it's okay to have a drink during the working day. Ron Friedman, thank you so much for your time. It's been a huge pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.